Hi everyone, welcome to another exciting edition of Words, Images, and Worlds. They're always exciting, and I am so glad on this episode to make a connection happen and a time work to talk with comics creator Steve Conley. Steve, thank you for jumping in and joining.
Thank you so much. I'm so very appreciative that you asked.
Of course, absolutely. Of course, folks out there will know you for work in a series called The Middle Age, which I assume has to do with people over the age of 40. Is this true?
It does. It does. It is absolutely a meant both ways, both set in a
Yes.
fantasy setting and write what you know. I started writing it when I was 44.
Nice,
So
nice.
it definitely leaned into just getting older and that it's a comedy. It's absolutely a comedy. So
Yeah.
there are some jokes about our hero being a little bit over the hill.
Yeah. Well, the trifecta, of course, is that given your style, given the book, it's a really ideal book for like sort of the upper elementary, middle grade space and beyond. So that's yet another aspect of the middle that's right there.
Yeah, it is a when I started writing it, my thought was for newspapers. I was almost out of comics. I had done comics for many years. Astounding Space Thrills was the one most people might have known me from web comics starting back in the late 90s.
Hmm.
And I'd done an all ages project called Bloop, and I've done some stuff for some mainstream companies like uh dabbled at DC and Dark Horse and IDW. And I was almost sure that comics as a self-publishing venture wasn't going to work for me. That I thought, I've tilted at this windmill long enough. Maybe I should focus on other things. And I was approached by an editor at Go Comics at and Andrews McMeel
Hmm.
and their syndication and said, "Well, if you ever had an idea for a comic strip." And I'm like, I grew up loving comic strips. Peanuts and Garfield and adventure comics like the Spider-Man comic that was in the newspaper and the Hulk comic strip happened to be in the newspaper when I was growing up. And my grandmother, who I wish you were still with us, I had gotten to know better. Every Christmas and birthday, she would give me this composition notebook into which she will have glued the newspaper comic strips. Every one of them was cut out of the
Aw.
Daily News and Newsday on Long Island. And I had these were my first collections of comics. We didn't have much growing up, but those were my comic books.
Hmm.
And I devoured comic strips. And when I had the chance, would you like to do a comic strip? I thought, sure. I'm not going anywhere. Comic strips are certainly on the ropes. So it's like, okay, fine. Let's see if I can make something happen in this quiet corner of comicdom. And that definitely made me think general audiences.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
I don't aim it at kids. I don't, there's definitely some jokes in there. I like to think of this as a sweet spot of um, Warner Brothers cartoons,
Hmm.
where kids love it. And then when you're a little bit older, you're getting different jokes. And as you get older, you get different jokes. And as someone said, is it kid friendly? I say it's free to read online. If you're a parent, check out middleagecomic.com, kick the tires. And if you think it's appropriate for your kid, then it's appropriate for your kid. My book is kid friendly, but I'm not sure if it's parent friendly. And
Ah, uh-huh, uh-huh.
it's kind of up to them. So that's where that's kind of where at least the market, I never really thought about it like that, but in terms
Hmm.
of where my heart is in terms of the kind of stories I want to tell stories for everybody. And so
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered a question or just circled the question and
I
poked it
think
a
that's
little
a
bit.
great response. That's a great response in any case. And uh, I just love an all ages book because as a teacher, I'm always looking for books that I can recommend. And as a teacher educator, sometimes people will ask me, what's a book if I have kids that are into comics? Because there are a certain number that they've read and, they always want to read more. So I love the kind of the affordance and possibilities of a book that anybody can pick up and read.
That's great. I love that. I love that you say all ages. That has sort of become a term that people think of as that means for kids.
Hmm.
But
Hmm.
all if you take it as all ages, I think that's pretty inviting for
Yeah.
a lot more people.
Absolutely. So tell us about, we've been talking about the book, but please tell us about the inspiration for Sir Quimp.
Uh, so Sir Grim is the hero of the Middle Age. The story is about a knight who is in love with the dragon and has a magic sword that hates him. It was meant for a comic strip, so I thought this is going to fail. So I had to have an exit strategy going into it. So I thought if we can get 50, if I can get 50 episodes, 50 pages, 50 strips out,
Hmm.
and we could put a bow on it, call it a day. The inspiration, so it had to be a short, I had that idea of, let's build an exit strategy into this comic if it's not going to take off.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so that absolutely contributed to how I thought of him. So that it had to be a gag comic, had to be funny from the get-go. So he is this middle-aged knight who is on a quest, which is fairly vaguely defined at the beginning because, again, who knows how much story we're going to get out in 50 episodes. And he finds a magic sword on page one, which is cursed, and it's a jerk. The sword is an absolute jerk. So it's kind of a
Hmm.
buddy comedy. He's a very Sir Quimp is a very romantic figure. He's trying to find his love, which is later revealed that it's a dragon pretty early on. I put that in the description nowadays, so I don't feel like it's spoilers. Um, uh, but I was at a Renaissance festival. And when I was there thinking about this comic strip, because this editor asked me about it, do a comic strip, and I had these thoughts of doing something more like The Office, but more dystopian, kind of a Douglas Adams version of The Office. Probably would be closer to Brazil, Terry Gilliam's Brazil than
Hmm.
anything.
Hmm.
Um, but I was at a Renaissance festival, and I think there was someone in cosplay walking by with a Pepsi, and there was just this incongruity. And I thought, this is so fun and silly, and the person's having a great time, and the incongruity is kind of like in Flintstones, where they can have garbage disposals.
Yeah, yeah.
It's right, make modern references, or at least allusions to things which are concepts which are modern, and but also leaning into the tropes of the genre that they're doing. So they're going to have to make the Flintstones has to make caveman jokes,
Hmm.
and the
Hmm.
Middle Age has to make high fantasy jokes. I grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons. I grew up reading comics, and a lot of that informs what I'm doing here. And I'm a huge fan of Douglas Adams, huge fan of Robert Sheckley. Sadly, I had no idea who uh, Terry Pratchett was when I started this thing. I thought
Yeah.
I'm going to do for fantasy what Douglas Adams did for sci-fi. I'm like, oh, someone's done that, and they own it, and they are the best at it ever. And so that's Sir Quip is this heroic character, and so the idea was it's going to be 50 episodes. Where we just posted uh, episode 313. It's been
Mhm.
going on for 8 years. It's gotten nine Ringo, Eisner, and NCS nominations. And that was one of the things in that window of 50 episodes. In that time, I found myself with a Patreon support. I found
Mhm.
myself with an Eisner nomination, things I never expected. Like I kind of joked that I submitted to the Eisner just to get six more readers. I thought at the very least, these people who have prestige in the industry will have to read it if I submit. Well, they'll have to read the first episode. They might read it and go, I'm not going to read any more of this, but at least they'd read the first episode.
Mhm.
And so it's been going ever since.
Yeah, yeah, very cool, very cool. And I'm curious, 8 years, what's it like to have the stamina to generate the creativity to kind of unfold a story and keep unfolding it like that?
Uh, it is the Patreon supporters have helped me a lot. There's kind of a thought of if I don't
Mhm.
upload an episode, I'm disappointing them. And there has been a period where I was able to do 2 episodes a week. I've gotten slower at it as I've worked. As my coloring, I do everything digitally, but I'm a one man show. I write it, color it, letter it, ink it, all that. And my coloring's gotten more labor intensive. What used to take me an hour takes me about a day now.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
uh, and as the story's gotten more complicated, again, when it was just a bunch of gags, I could just knock those out pretty easily. But as the story's gotten more complex and um, it's become more work, and so
Yeah.
my the speed of which of it has slowed, and also I'm not getting any younger. Uh, but it's interesting. The idea of starting a long-term project is a lot I've, compared to like being on a generation ship. The science fiction concept of like
Mhm.
you, you know the descendants of the people who land the vessel. The person who's piloting the ship is a very different person than the person who launched the ship. I'm a very
Right.
different person. A lot of stuff has happened in the last 8 years. The world has had its ups and very low downs, and that's hard to write chuckles in the middle of during a pandemic. It's hard to write a gag.
Mhm. Mhm.
Um, but at the same time, it was a thing where people were looking for. I think it helped my audience or helped me find an audience because a lot of people were looking for laughs, something light and not of this time. I think that's another thing that people looked for. They didn't want to. They get their fill of politics. They get their fill of contemporary commentary, and for at least this little window, there's something which is not that. And I'm certain it's informed by my philosophy and my ethics and my politics, but it's not done in a way which is trying to say vote this way or vote that way or that sort of thing. It's much more like, very humanist, kind
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
upbeat. So
Nice.
I don't think I get. I'm I'm jousting towards your question, and at the last second, I'm veering and going away
No,
from
I
it.
think it's great. It's totally great. And I love the metaphor here since we're talking about the Middle Age as well. What's the creative process like as you're working on this?
I have a script. I know, well, all the stories I've written, I know the ending. So I write toward the ending. And even if I want to take a detour, I know as long as I keep my eye on where I'm going, this whole thing should land, provided I live long enough. Um, so my process is I start with an outline of where I'm going. I have essentially chapters, sections. Chapters is might be too strong a word. I've got sections upon which or within which I know certain things have to happen for later events to make sense and to
Mhm.
build upon the things I've done before. And then within that framework of here are the 10 things that have to happen on the next 5 pages or 10 pages, I cram it with jokes. I cram it with red herrings and um, silliness and hopefully just uh, character building moments and things like that. Things that hopefully share more about the characters and make people lean on unreliable narrators to deceive the reader while taking people where I want to take them.
Nice, nice. Love that. Uh, no, I think we already talked about kind of the inspiration for the all ages approach. I'm curious about if people want to find these because I know they're also in printed volumes as
Yeah.
well.
Oh,
Uh,
and I
mhm.
just got we just finished the crowdfunding for volume three, and this box just came today of volume three of the
Nice.
Middle Age, and it turned out great. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, these just arrived. They're in print. They are online. I know I do. It's a web comic. It's always going to be free to read. Again, I didn't have much growing up as a kid, and getting those books from my grandmother of newspaper comics, which kind of felt free. People weren't
Hmm.
buying the newspaper for the comics, and not entirely anyway. And when a newspaper was 25 cents, I don't the comics creators were getting less than a Spotify rate.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so getting those books for free and making sure my comics always going to be free for people who, I don't want to essentially paywall my work.
Hmm.
But it's available in a lot of formats. If you like digital and hardcover copies, they're available from my website at middleagecomic.com or steveconley.com. They're also available on Amazon. You can get their Kindle editions, and they're part of Kindle. Oh, what the heck? The Prime Reader. So, like, I think the
Hmm.
first collection is free, but you can read the web comic for free online anyway, either on Webtoons or Tapas or Go Comics and my own website. And then there's soft cover editions are available from Amazon as well, and those do well. Those do well.
Yeah, yeah. Now I mentioned that I've seen you at Heroes Con. Are there other conventions that you like to frequent?
Absolutely. Heroes Con is one of my favorite. I like the Baltimore Comic Con. I tend to like comic conventions. I don't think it's a coincidence. I like comic conventions that are run by comic shop owners.
Hmm.
I think
Hmm.
they have they're not, they're, they kind of are steeped in comics and they don't pick their guest list based on necessarily who is the biggest seller or whatever. It's like based on the comics that they like. And so they end up having a deep bench of creators.
Hmm. Hmm.
They love cartoonists. They tend to treat us better. Um, but this weekend coming up, I'm not sure when this will air, but I'll be doing the Daytona Beach Comic Convention, then I'll be doing the Baltimore Comic Con, and now I started doing gaming conventions because, again, mentioned I grew up loving Dungeons and Dragons. The
Hmm.
pandemic forced me to spend even more time at my desk, and in that time, I learned how to sculpt, 3D sculpt, and so I started making minis of my characters. These
I
are like
love that.
3D print.
Cool, cool.
And so these are scale, the idea is that when you scale this down to a 1 inch base, that's like the Dungeons and Dragons size. So I started making D&D books kind of set in the world, because telling my story one episode a week or two episodes a week, that's a slow drip of a story. Like you're basically
Hmm.
getting it, in a TikTok era, you're to deliver a story at such a slow pace is kind of probably agonizing to fans. Um,
Yeah.
so, and I also want to explore parts of the world, but I can't do that within the narrative. I don't want to derail our story, like with, again, keeping an eye on where I'm going. If I would love to explore this town and how it was founded and all this kind of backstory that's just sitting in the back of my head and it will never find its way onto the page, because why would anyone want to slog through that when they're just waiting for the sword to make another quip?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I do Dungeons and Dragons content now. I make play, so if people play D&D, they can pick up how to be a drunken wizard, like in my story, or there'll be a section on how to, the King of the Ducks or things like that. So if people want to play D&D inspired by this silly world, or even not even connected to the world, just I try to make them good standalone projects. Um, that's given me a opportunity, another venue to explore this world without slowing the story down. And those can
Awesome.
be found at Drive Through RPG and on my website. So if you go to my website, you're looking for my books and you suddenly see a lot of gaming stuff, that's what it is.
So cool. And readers can immerse themselves and explore even more. I
Yeah,
love that.
it lets me have little corners of like intoximancy. It's such a silly thing. It's kind of a simple joke about this drunken wizard and his speaking gibberish and things like that. And I end up writing the game rules for how you speak gibberish. And Dungeons and Dragons weirdly doesn't have any rules for intoxication. I was appalled. And so I got to write rules for, they're not official. Everything I do is kind of like the homebrew, no pun, uh, kind of side of things. But um, anywho, I'm rambling again.
No, no, you're good. I'm just thinking, we've talked Terry Pratchett. I'm feeling a Tolkien reference going on now
Sure.
about like creating languages and rules for games and things. So, very, very cool. I love the world building, and there's just something about fantasy too that is engaging and that just allows for that kind of narrative play.
Absolutely. Absolutely. 100%. It is, you come into it, the reader comes into it. I think readers love the first few pages of a book. They love figuring out where they are, getting their bearings, and it's so much fun to, you know, just drop a person into this world. And so much of the fun of it is figuring the world out. Um, Trying to keep that sense of wonder in the story in a way, and also getting to play off all the expectations. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
a kid doesn't come into it with like having watched the Rankin Bass Hobbit and all, have watched the extended director's editions of Lord of the Rings 50 times. But I know my readers have. And so I never make it the main course. It's an Easter egg. There might be just a nod to something like
Hmm.
that, but
Hmm.
also playing off the expectations when the whole idea with the story was that the sword is cursed. So typical trope is you got the sword, it's cursed, and it's not normally when you pick up a cursed sword in games or in fiction, you're stuck with it. Like now I can't put it down. It's going to ruin my life. And it's a curse. This flips it. It's a cursed sword. The sword's curse is that it's stuck with him.
Hmm.
And the idea that just taking every trope that I can and never and going, okay, how do I not? What's if they're expecting a zig, how do I zag every time? If I
Hmm.
can do that, because then that keeps them hopefully a little bit off their uh keeps them off their maybe on their guard. That's probably a better way to put it. Keeps them so like they're a little bit more defensive as they're reading the story, so they can be surprised more. Like just every time, just make them lean in a little bit, and they pull the rug out.
Hmm. Hmm. Love it. Love it. Well, Steve, I greatly appreciate the time. I
Yeah.
appreciate the conversation and the creating. Have we missed anything that you would want readers to know? Any glimpses ahead or any final words about this world of all ages books that you're creating?
Uh, just check out middleagecomic.com. The story has 313 pages of a sprawling epic that I didn't think I was going to be able to continue, and it's continued. And I can't thank my Patreon supporters enough. All of it's been done through crowdfunding.
Mm.
I'm so appreciative of your show. I love that there are archives of these conversations. I mean, not necessarily mine, but all the other ones. because
including this one.
there's just I try to go back and find the interviews. I'd love to have it something like this with a Walt Kelly, something like this with
Oh
any
yeah,
cartoonist of the past, where you could get to hear their when it's not just a dry transcript. It is you get to hear their voice and
yeah.
the and so I love that you're doing this. And but if people want to check out my comic, please, middleagecomic.com, Webtoons tap is Go Comics. I'll be at the Baltimore Comic Con as I have for 25 years. This is the 25th year of the show. I'll be there. Um, I like to be at Heroes Con, South Carolina Comic Con, the SE Comic Con in Greenville.
Mhm.
Um, I hope to see people there.
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for your kind words about the show, and it's a pleasure. Folks should definitely check out your work and enjoy it. And my goodness, it's out there on the internet. Give it a shot, give it a chance, and I don't think people will be disappointed in any way.
You're very kind. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.